Hello, Mary. It's a pleasure to see you again. Obviously, we go quite far back. It's just nice to hang out with you and talk about your creative process, which is kind of why we're here today. But as I have named this podcast, at least tentatively, a brew with Dom, I have a cup of tea here, in a cup that says "Brutiful." You can't probably see that there, but it says "Brutiful."
Beautiful.
There you go. Um,
That's
And
great.
I'm wondering, do you have a drink to hand? And if you don't worry
I
about it. But do you have
do.
like a, oh, you do?
Yeah, okay. So I also have a cup of tea because it's cold and rainy here, but mine is in a very chipped up gnome cup that
It's
says
a Mary. Yes, it does.
Mary
That's
on it.
amazing. Where does it, what significant, when did you buy that cup? Tell me about it. It's a great cup.
It was actually it was a Christmas gift from my father and my stepmother. It was like a few years ago, and I like this one because it's big and I don't have to refill it as often.
It's great. It's a good one. What kind of tea are you drinking?
It's Yorkshire Gold.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
Was that my fault? I can't remember if that was my fault.
Yes, that's your fault. Was that's when I can find it here, that's what I grab. So there's a couple stores that have it sometimes.
Amazing. I'm glad. I'm glad that in my lifetime, if I can look back and say I had some impact on people, if I can say that I inspired you to drink Yorkshire tea, that actually is quite high up there on my list of achievements.
You
So
spread your Yorkshire propaganda.
absolutely, well, you're also one of the only like Americans that'll ever have actually hung out in the darkest reaches of Yorkshire. People go to Leeds occasionally. I mean, that's probably the most. Oh, York, of course. We went to York. York's
Yeah.
probably the most notable one, but no one ever goes to Hull. So you've
Well,
been you've been
it was kind of nice to I read a lot of old books and a lot of them are, and even newer ones that take place in that area because it's a great setting in books, especially like old mystery novels and like, your Bronte novels and stuff like that. So it's nice to actually be able to see what it looks like in
yeah.
person, and it's fantastic to have been able to do that, and it's not something that a lot of Americans necessarily see. So
No, of course not. Especially where we went. People go to America, people go to London, and people go to Manchester, maybe, and York, of course, and Edinburgh.
Mhm.
But yeah, you've been to the darkest reaches, the darkest corners of Yorkshire, hanging out with me. So once again, I appreciate your friendship and your time, which I think we're coming up to. Was it like 20 years? Maybe
It's
less.
getting dangerously close to
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I have a lot of fond memories, and you of course are at the center of most of those from being over there. So me and Mary, for those that don't know, I went to Keene State College for a little while, and Mary was a huge inspiration to me there. I used to hang out with you as you were part of you at the radio station, and you used to present there because you've got the best voice, you have the most fun voice of anyone I've ever met in my life. Um,
Yeah, it's good to hear people think that, because I always have that when I hear recordings of myself, I just sort of go like, oh, that's what I sound like.
it's very
It
soothing.
sounds a lot fuller in your own, richer in your own head than.
Yeah. No, it's very soothing. And yeah, it's very, I always found it very comforting. But anyway, we're here to talk about your artistic process because I've watched you sort of grow and develop as an artist. And the reason why I set this up was to, again, take the pressure off from doing interviews with bands and artists and having, management expectations and stuff. This is about me talking to people that I really care about, and people that I admire who are doing cool stuff, basically. I haven't quite worked out whether I want to swear on this podcast, but anyway, I'll say cool stuff instead of cool shit.
Okay.
Um,
I'll try to restrain myself, but I am also a conversational swearer,
yeah,
so
feel
we'll see.
free, feel free. So yeah, so tell me about kind of your because obviously I've known a little bit of your background. Where does your kind of passion for art come from, and how has that changed and developed over the years?
It's kind of hard to pinpoint because I started, according to my mom, when I was about 5 years old, is when I started taking an interest in drawing, and it was just always kind of a like, I like doing this and I want to get better at it. And there are quite a few artists in my family and friends of the family, so I was just always sort of surrounded by that kind of thing and had access to, you know, materials and advice. So it's just kind of, I don't know, it just feels like it's just sort of part of who I always have been, if that makes
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah, it
sense.
does.
Yeah.
I think as an extension of that, because again, I've known you worked as an artist for a very, very long time. Obviously, you studied it, and you've obviously been doing it a lot since, college and things like that. How has your definition of, I guess, success changed? Because you've got followers on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and things like that, but you've been actually doing this a lot longer than people might realize. So how has your definition of success changed as an artist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like it does, you know, over time, because I feel like when I was in high school and I was at that, like, I'm getting really into learning technique in different mediums, and I'm planning on going to art school, and that kind of thing is growing. I had a lot more of that, you know, like, I'm going to be a big star idea in my head, but, you know, and also like that romantic, you know, starving artist, you know, living in squalor in Paris kind of idea is always mixed in there. And then you get older and you kind of realize squalor is not as fun as you thought. But at this point, you know, I feel like a lot of it is I do it more for myself than anything else. I like being able to make art for other people and reach other people. But it's really more always been about, you know, this is the art I want to make. Can I take that idea from my head and, you know, put it on paper properly and have the skills to do that? So I feel like my benchmarks are much more about that. And it's hard because there's, you know, these days with, like you said, TikTok and Twitter, I have some following on all of those, but not, you know, huge comparatively, but there's so much pressure, like, online, like if you don't have those numbers, there's this feeling like maybe you're not legitimate. And it's really I think important for creative people to remember that, you know, that those numbers don't actually matter. You didn't get into this to be, you know, a Twitter star. Twitter didn't even exist, you know, when I started. So it's learning those how to recognize what actually is a priority and, you know, what's not actually real. And it is a balancing act, because you'll see, if you want to make a living and not just do this as a hobby, you do also need to reach people, because those are your potential clients. So it's a balancing act. But as long as I can keep doing what I'm doing and keep getting better, I think that's really that's what success is to me at this point.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And before we talk about your advice for any kind of emerging artists who sort of are, inspired by your work or your journey, what about your artistic and musical inspirations? So stuff that inspires you right now. I maybe know some of those, but for the people that have never sort of encountered your work before, who are your biggest artistic and musical inspirations?
And you know, because you know me, but it's like, you know, my taste is so eclectic, and I did come up through that kind of late 90s, early 2000 goth scene that was just hanging on. But I pull so much like from that time, from like, you know, I listened to The Cure and Bauhaus and all of those kinds of things. But it's these days, actually, I spend a lot of time listening to all kinds of things, but I've really taken a shine to electro swing of all things. So
Okay,
like
cool.
Caravan Palace and stuff like that. It's good to work to. I mean, as far as like artistically, you know, it is all over the place too, because I love like the Art Nouveau movement, and illustrators like Beatrix Potter and Edward Gorey were a huge part of me growing up. And just, it's kind of an eclectic mix of so many things, it's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. And I mean, we will ask I'll ask a little bit about specifically what inspires you, in terms of, stylistically. Is it because, again, the stuff you were doing when I knew you was very much goth inspired, and obviously there, you've become a little bit more, I guess, as you've been selling your products, I guess a little bit more accessible? I don't know, but like what is it about those artists that in terms of their style that just always that excited you?
Yeah, I think with like I'm trying to think, should I start with one particular artist?
Yeah. I suppose it's quite a loaded question. So
yeah, it's a big question because I'm like, I just said a lot of stuff and now I have to qualify it all. I mean, if we want to start with like musically, because music's always been a huge part of my life and my processes. I listen to a lot of music when I create too, and I think like The Cure, which were my favorite band all through high school and college. One of the things that's great is like, it doesn't matter what mood you're in, there's a Cure album for that, because it's such a vast library. And Robert Smith was an artist who did not think much of just changing up his style. Like, there is always that thread of, you can tell, like, you hear it and you know who it is, but I like the variety and the creative freedom to try different things like that. Is I feel like I don't like being too narrow and like, this is what I do and this is who I am, which is, I think, part of why I sort of drifted away from that very goth style. Is I think it was emblematic of the era when I was making those things, but I've really expanded creatively and as a person since then.
Yeah,
which is part of it.
Of course. I mean, would you say, I guess this sort of strays away a little bit from art, but would you say you're a happier person these days, or is that part of it?
It's a funny question to answer after the last 3 years, because it's like, I think in a lot of ways intrinsically I'm happier in myself, but obviously there's a lot of external factors in the world these days, so it can be it can be a roller coaster. But overall, I think that a lot of the things that when I was young and insecure and, in college and trying to figure out who I was going to be and how to be an adult, like, a lot of those issues now that I'm older are not really pressing anymore. And I think that confidence and experience kind of at least dulls the edges of that, like, kind of existential horror that we all have when we're like, 20 and not ready for anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've become, your life experience has taught you more about the world. So maybe instead of saying you're necessarily a happier person, even though you certainly come across that way to me, you're certainly more educated about the ways of the world and more informed about the realities of our existence, which sounds really deep.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I think that it's, as I've gotten older, I'm less depressed and just more like curmudgeonly at this point. So I'm somewhere on the way to happy, just because I'm just mad at everything now instead. It's an easier emotion.
Absolutely. And I do want to ask about your sort of visual. Obviously, you talk about some artists that you're inspired by there, but obviously I've got a lot of great memories of watching movies and cartoons with you, and you introduced me to a lot of cool, parts of pop culture that I wasn't necessarily a part of or I didn't know much about before I got to America. So is there anything visually, like movies, any kind of visual media that you still draw inspiration from, or will always have a special place in your heart for inspiration?
I mean, definitely. I mean, like you said, I've always been a big fan of animation, and I would have to I think if I was going to cite anyone specific, I would say the animation work of Don Bluth, as he did An American Tail and Secret of Nim, which were both films that I watched continuously, especially Secret of Nim as a child. And I still actually watch that because it's a beautifully done, hand painted animation. And just like the way that his characters, like the animal characters in the stories he told him, were brought to life, and just the effort that was put in there, really great. But then it's like, I also weirder stuff like Ralph Bakshi's. I remember last time you visited, I played Wizards for you, and that was bizarre. But yeah, it's a lot of those, and even like really old cartoons. I grew up with a lot of little VHS collections of like old Popeye and Betty Boop from the 30s and things like that. So that's probably a good chunk of where the silly little animal characters that I deal with these days come from, is really pulling from those kind of core memories at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Some very fond memories for me there, and it's lovely to hear you talk about them and reflect on your own experience. In terms of making it into a business, and what's the biggest thing that you had to learn transitioning from the passionate creative artist that I've always known you to be, which you still are in a lot of ways? What was the biggest challenge in translating from that to actually making it a business, where you are, generating an income and you are relying on the outside world to engage with your work?
I think that I had to learn a few different things in phases. Because for a very good chunk of my life, I really just made art for me, and it was what I wanted to make. And, friends saw it, but that was about it. And then I finally had an opportunity to go out on my own. And the biggest thing was learning how to transition from, being a troll in my cave, just huddled up over my drawings, to actually having to go out, show work in a public space, and interact with other human beings. Because I'm not like, once you get to know me, I'll never shut up. But initially, I'm pretty shy with people. So it's learning to carry on those conversations and make connections, and just anything to do with self-promotion, because that's such a foreign concept to me. I'm not a natural salesperson. And then to go from doing a lot of in-person public events and having mastered that skill to now we're in a pandemic, everything's shut down. And I know this impacted creatives of every stripe. You no longer had access to people, and you had to retreat to the internet and try to be heard over the, millions of other equally talented voices that are out there. And it's just, what's the best approach to take? Is I'm not going to be cruelly competitive, and I don't think that really plays anyway in the long term, but just trying to build that community and make those connections, because it's very different than an in-person face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what if you were going to advise any other kind of artists that are either inspired by your work or sort of making that transition from, just being a passionate artist, maybe they've just finished studying and they want to, go out there and make money from it? What are the 3 key skills and things you would want to see from that person? And also, as a second strand to that question, what would you not want to see from an artist who is trying to get out there and make it work?
I think that the biggest thing that I notice, and I made a lot of the same mistakes starting out too, is it's like when you first get started, not knowing how to make a good presentation, because those first impressions matters a lot. Of when I was doing things, publicly, I'd have a lot of times fairs, I'd have my little table, and it was messy and kind of jumbled, and I didn't know how to display things. So it's, taking the time, and this applies to, when you're taking photos online as well. It's, it's good to, sometimes you're just taking a photo on the fly to post quick, and that's fine, but you want to have a good presentation and have some, clear photos and have things well arranged, and taking the time to learn those skills is really huge. And it's something that I'm still working on. And sometimes I'm just like, this room is pitch black, but I'm going to try and snap a photo of this sketchbook anyway. And it's terrible, but yeah, it's trying to develop those good habits is probably the biggest thing. Is you want people to think that, your art's important, not like it looks like it's trash, because it's just not. Presented properly.
Yeah, so it's the presentation. It's presenting. Yeah, it's presenting your work properly. And you have answered my next question. Well, the second part of that question, pretty much. But again, what was the biggest sort of because a lot of interviews that I do, people obviously talk about their triumphs and the things they're proud of, and we will talk about those in a second. But they shy away from the mistakes, you know. And I wanted to ask you, because I try and normalize mistakes as part of the creative process wherever possible. And if you are comfortable, could you share, one or two mistakes that you've made and things that you've really been able to learn from that's really helped you?
Like, do you mean in terms of actual making art, or in terms of just interacting with the world and presenting
Both.
that art, or both? Okay.
One from each category.
One from each category. I mean, you usually with art, it's kind of one of those, sometimes you're creating something and it just flows out of you and it's perfect and beautiful. And sometimes it's an uphill fight. And at the end you have something horrible. But like, especially with visual media, I have the advantage of being able to just burn that horrible painting and nobody else ever actually has to see it. I can hide that. But, which I think is one of the advantages of being a visual artist like this, versus like, you can't do that if you're a live musician. People know if it's that bad. But, it's like anything, you're going to have some truly just terrible pieces if you're doing your job right, because you're trying new things and pushing boundaries, and sometimes that does not work. And that's how you learn what actually does work. It's actually really important to make those kind of horrible mistakes. In terms of like interacting with the outside world portion of it, though, I think that the biggest thing for me is just that I am such an absolute like recluse most of the time, and I don't answer phone calls and I don't pay attention to my email necessarily, and that's something I've actually had to get better about, and just being organized, because my natural instinct is to just hide inside and scribble away and act insane. So it's that professionalism of you are representing yourself now, and there's no boss that's going to come by and yell at you, so you have to remember to actually be professional. And that's always the challenge, because I didn't become a full-time artist because I enjoy working a 9-to-5 job and being a responsible adult at the end of the day, but it is part of the part of the package. So you have to develop that self-discipline at some point.
Absolutely. I'm still working on that myself. From challenges to triumphs, then, things that you are most proud of. Obviously your work is out there, it's great to be able to share that with other people and connect to the people. I've certainly sent a few people your way. In terms of your triumphs and things that you are most proud of, can you give me a couple of examples of things that you, even when you are older, and you maybe maybe you're finishing up your art. I suppose you could probably do it until you die, but when you're much older, what will you look back on and go, man, I can't believe I was able to do that. That's so cool that happened to me.
Yeah, I think from a personal work perspective, I really feel like the last maybe 3 to 5 years is when I've really actually gotten to the point where my skill level and my style have it has developed enough that that's all intersecting, and I'm finally just producing the work that I actually want to make. And it's opening some interesting doors, because it's like right now, people who follow me will have seen I have the animal characters that I do paintings of. And, as I've been developing those characters visually, I started to, get back into writing again, which is something that I had set aside for a long time, so that I'm actually able to, I'm going to be getting ready to at some point later this year, when I've got all the illustrations done, I'm going to be illustrating a story to release to the world. So these characters are actually going to, like, it's not just the stories I tell myself anymore. I'm actually going to be putting that out there, which is, it's nerve-wracking, because it's such a huge risk anytime you take your what starts out as a very personal thing and put it out there for the entire world to look at. Because as anyone who hangs out on online spaces knows it can be pretty brutal.
Yeah.
If even just a few people don't like what you're up to. So I think that in terms of accomplishment, it's just getting to that point where I think that I'm actually doing the work that I really want to do, and I'm getting confident enough to actually put myself out there and show that to everyone else is pretty huge, compared to, say, where I was even, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Absolutely, man. I'm so proud of you. I think it's amazing. I've obviously watched you progress, and I've wanted to chat with you, and I'm really glad I could sit in front of you more, digitally anyway, and sort of just say, it's so cool. Like, I'm so pleased you finally, you're getting there, and because I know that you've worked hard to, get involved in the local community, and even though it's uncomfortable for you, and that's really cool, man. It's finally happening for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice. Getting involved in the local community, I think, is a huge part of that. And that's another thing for anyone who's just starting out. And it's harder right now than when I started, obviously. But if you live near a city that has like art walks or art shows and things like that, where you can go out and meet other people in your local art community, find your people who are going to support you and make those connections, it really does make a huge difference. Yeah. In terms of that creative output.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to give you the opportunity to plug future projects in a minute as we finish off. But I'd like to ask, what is your message then for anybody listening to this or watching it? What is your message to anyone who has supported you, or has yet to discover your work? What would you like to say to those people?
I really appreciate the people who find my work and like it. It's one of those, it's ultimately being creative is kind of a selfish process, because I'm making the things that I care about and they're my ideas, and I'm going, oh, these are great, I should show everybody because I'm awesome, and having some people agree with me that they're awesome is really fantastic, because I love positive feedback. So I just appreciate everyone who does, like and share and tell me how cool I am, because like I am starved for attention. So, it's just, I appreciate that, and I hope more people find something in my artwork and my stories that they, like, and or that inspires them and, just makes them a little bit happier, because it's what we want to do, is leave things a little better than when we started, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a question I've been asking in some of my interviews more recently, because there's a word that, and it ties into your response there. It's a word that some people have a difficult relationship with, and that's legacy. What would do you think about that at all in terms of your legacy, what you would like it to be? And if you do, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, and and I think that the creating stories like I'm trying to do now plays into that. As I think, and it's a little bit, egotistical and selfish in a way, but think about it, it's like, I don't really want my artwork to be something that's just, when I'm gone someday, completely forgotten. And ideally, it'll live on and people will continue to like it and continue to like those stories that I'm trying to tell. And if, all goes to plan, maybe my son will be able to just ride my corpse to wealth and stardom anyway, which would be fantastic for him. It's the biggest thing for me is there's so many.
I'm still laughing at the riding of the corpse. I apologize. Sorry, I interrupted your flow because I've just had a visual. Okay.
No problem. No, it's just the biggest thing is I would like to, in some positive fashion be remembered, is really what it is at the end of the day. And if at all possible, it's like you like to see the things you build give an advantage to, your children and, or whoever. And that's really the biggest thing. So, may he have a great lucrative deal with Disney someday when I'm gone,
Absolutely. Well, my fingers are firmly crossed. So in terms of attention, in terms of where you would like to send people, where can people, obviously I'll put some links in the description below, but if you can direct people to where you would like them to go and share some links.
Oh, yeah. It's I do have a website, which is marybottomart.com, And they can find me there, or you can find me on Twitter. Pretty much all of my social media is at Mary Bottom Art, or some variation thereof. If you search Mary Bottom, there's not a lot of us out there. You'll find me. Just look for the Badger art. And I'd love to see people. I'm most active on Twitter, but I'm a raving lunatic on there, fair warning. But it's my website has, examples of my art, links to my shops, things like that. That's where I infrequently update my blog with, updates on what's going on. But that's really a good place to start if you're looking for links outward to find me too.
Brilliant. Okay. As an end question that I've just thought of, because I think it'd be really cool to ask you, it's like a variation on the desert island things. If you could take one record with you towards the end of the world, I really need to work on how I phrase this question. It's the first time I've asked it in this way. But if you could take a record with you towards the end of the world, as in the only record you've got, what record is it?
Oh, just one?
just one, yeah.
Okay, probably Disintegration by The Cure.
Yeah, that's how I know you, is that record, really. So I could have probably...
That was a hard choice, though. I panicked.
Okay, what movie?
What movie? So probably Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh, classic. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Brilliant film.
Yeah, so it's a great film. It's a great film. You mentioned your book. You mentioned the potential of a book coming up. Is there any? Obviously, some projects might be secret. Some things might be secret. But is there anything coming up that you can tell us about that you want people to know about as well? In terms of, obviously, I know you've been doing some exhibitions. I know things are, you've been doing things like that. So, what projects have you got coming up?
Yeah, well, people stay tuned, and I'm going to start showing locally again. So if anybody is, in my region of the world, paying attention to my website, I'll be making announcements about dates, as I have. I'm not sure on the date. I have one show coming up that some of my oil painting pieces are going to be featured. I said at some point later this year, I've got that short story coming out, and the first one I'm planning to release for free online, so people can check that out without breaking the bank. Other than that, it's all kind of up in the air, but paying attention to my social media is a good way to find out when something does happen.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mary. It's a pleasure to catch up and get to know you.
It's great seeing you.
It's lovely to see you as well. I'm sure we'll catch up again soon for a part 2. Maybe I can do that when I come over and visit.
Oh, that would be fun. Fantastic.